Welcome to the second in our series in this particular series. It's a very cold night, so great that you turned up. We're very lucky to have a professor in our midst who's going to enliven the whole evening, actually. So you don't want to listen to me talking. I'll give you over to Professor Anthony Towey.
Thank you. Apologies for doing a good impression of the scatty professor. As Daniel will tell you, I had to pretend to be my wife to access this computer. So any sort of transitioning that happens before your eyes is probably for technical reasons, let's say. It's a pleasure to be here, and I think I accepted this invitation just before COVID started. So it's been a long while, and fresh in the minds of Kevin at the time was I had done my inaugural over there at Strawberry Hill, and I'd taken as my title, what was a kind of counterintuitive title, was that Catholic RE, or Catholic Religious Education, could actually be a set of lessons in liberation. It was meant to be a bit of an oxymoron. Those of you remember questions like, who made me? What was the next one? Why did he make me? Next. I knew that when you got to next, we'd be at the end. Now, here's the thing. RE's changed a bit since then, as you're probably dimly aware at least. In a way, you could argue for Catholic RE, it's the best of times and the worst of times, to quote Dickens rather than the Pope. In the UK at the minute, Catholic RE enjoys robust health, and with new religious education curricula and new Section 48 measures on the horizon and a new curriculum directorate, so the entire way the subject is going to be mapped are all going to be new. It's a lively and creative space. However, on the other hand, a series of public reports that came out in 2018 have implicitly critiqued Catholic education in general, and Catholic RE in particular, by suggesting that the historic right of the bishops to say what's on those curricula must be counter-critical. It's an exercise in confessionalism. And so whether you're looking at Charles Clark and Linda Woodhead's New Settlement for RE, or the Warwick University pamphlet, How to Regulate Faith Schools, you've already got positions taken in opposition to the Catholic approach. I also served on a thing called the Commission on Religious Education, and actually all three of those reports that came out from that group suggested a change in the name of RE. Clark and Woodhead said it should be changed to Religion, Beliefs and Values. The Commission on RE said it should be changed to Religion and Worldviews. And the Warwick University one suggested it should be changed to CREAM. Civic, religious, ethical and moral education. And as I've remarked before, it was the first time in history that cream rose to the bottom. Now, it's astonishing that RE, which is an acknowledged strength of not just Catholic schools, but also faith schools in general, should be taken as a point of attack by those who would want to close Catholic schools. It's really odd. And given that those same lessons are part of an agenda which include other religions, it seems particularly odd, given that David Cameron, anybody remember David Cameron? He and Nicky Morgan and other grandees had suggested that religion and religious teaching, religious literacy, was a key point that needed emphasis in terms of community cohesion. You know, how do we need to learn more about Islam, we need to learn more about Judaism, Sikhism, etc. So it was a bit confusing. I mean, David Cameron tried to help us by putting a set of British values on every wall of every school. I don't know if you've seen these things. It's fantastic to nationalise morality. I didn't think the Tories were keen on nationalisation, but in this case they were. Now, what is the issue? And I'm going to use religious education as a microcosm of what people think of faith schools in general. Is that the point can be made that education, and religious education in particular, is a place that's stuffed full of agendas, as Jim Conway would say. Loads of people are trying to do loads of things. Imagining our children as some kind of empty vessels that will be filled with our wisdom. Now, I don't know if any of these people have met a teenager, but all I would say is I don't think it's as easy as that. And what various solutions have been suggested. Well, how do Catholic schools show that they are properly critical? The fact that the great universities of this country were founded on Catholic foundations should demonstrate that criticality and theology, or criticality and confessional stance, they're not mutually exclusive. But in relation to something like philosophy, you could teach philosophy. But I think ultimately we would even see philosophy as at the service of the biggest question, which is the question of God. You know, it doesn't get any bigger than that. It doesn't get any more portentous. It doesn't get any more involving than the question of God. So tonight, for one night only, I'm going to ask you to imagine what you would do if you're in my position, which is looking to map the contours of what should be in Catholic education in general, Catholic RE in particular. I'm going to pitch to you what I think should be included in Catholic RE and invite you to do the same. After all, katholon, the Greek for Catholic, word from which Catholic comes from, means according to all. Or as James Joyce put it, here comes everybody. Now, I'm going to start with C. C, Catholic, begins with C. Last time I looked. What does C stand for? It's an element that I think we can't miss out on. Christianity. That's a good one. I've not chosen that though. I think I've not chosen that one, but I think that's a very good start. Anybody else? I know you two are sat together. I know. You two can fight that one out. I'm not thinking of that. I'll tell you what I've gone for. Cosmology. It could be those things, Christ or Christianity. While I personally regard Jesus, I regard Jesus as the Alpha and Omega, the first and the last, in a bid for maximum inclusivity and Catholic universality, let's start with cosmology. All right, for several reasons. As Maria von Trapp, or was it Julie Andrews, said, let's start at the very beginning. It's a very good place to start. Oh, it's good acoustics in here. Even I sound all right in here. This is good. And that's exactly what Genesis does. Bereshit bara Elohim et ha'shamayim ve'et ha'aretz. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth. It's an ancient meditation on creation and considers the wonder of the world, which in turn triggers fundamental lines of theological, philosophical, and scientific inquiry. Obviously, these include the question, why is there something rather than nothing? And indeed, although Julie Andrews is not too well known in philosophical circles, her famous line, Nothing comes from nothing. Nothing ever could. That was quoted by Anthony Flew, who was the Richard Dawkins of his day, when he forsook his atheism for theism. Because at the end of the day, making a gamble on this whole caboodle being pure chance is almost more of an act of faith than any proposal that there's an intelligent deity behind it all. So, why is anything here? Never mind, why are we here? Now, not only does any fair-minded engagement with cosmology nail the ridiculously false opposition between science and religion, where would we be without Copernicus, a priest, Newman, who thought his religious writings were more important than his calculus? He may have got that a bit wrong. I'll just leave that with you. Michael Faraday, electromagnetics. Mendel, my sister is here, did a doctorate on genetics. Oh, I can't remember how old I was when that was happening, but way back. Mendel, a monk, and the author of the Big Bang Theory. Most kids know what the Big Bang Theory is, or they've heard of it. They don't know that it was thought up by a priest, George Lemaitre. Even though it was Fred Hoyle who called it the Big Bang Theory, he didn't like it. He wanted to discredit it. So it's a topic which involves our common home. Everybody has to be interested in this. You don't need COP23 to tell you that, okay? So whatever tribe we're from, whatever stripe we wear, we are creatures in a relationship with the earth. Reality is relational. Atoms are relational. And it's subatomic relationality that holds us together. If this is a proton, that's a neutron. The electron would be in Stockholm. It means that most atoms are full of empty space. If somebody calls you a waste of space, they're fundamentally being accurate. But we don't think of ourselves like that. We regard ourselves as solid citizens. But this whole that nature is relational is why we got so excited about the Higgs boson particle, which of course proved that God's a Catholic, because you can't have mass without it. Ponder that one. Now, this connectivity, let's go a bit more theological for a minute. We might be familiar with that beautiful hymn in Colossians. He is the icon of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. In him all things hold together. There's a connectivity about our universe. Through him all things are made. John chapter 1 verse 3. And for the Catholic, they advert to what's often called the sacramental nature of reality. That creation provides a context for encounter and the conditions of possibility for the supreme religious question. How do I love? How do I love? Hence, care for our common home becomes a concern for all of us, even if that is only dawning on some of us now. A chorus of voices from Pope Francis, Friends of the Earth, vegans, to children protesting ecological damage should not be ignored. And by the way, check Genesis 1:29, where worryingly, it seems to suggest that in our prelapsarian innocent state, we were given only fruit and vegetables to eat. Check it out, 129. The vegetarians might be right. And lastly, one more point about creation. The first creation introduces the point of Sabbath, Shabbat. On the seventh day, the perfect day, we find liberation. Liberation from doing, which is one of the many addictions of our day. Let me enjoin a penance upon you, or a discipline, to say this. This coming liturgical year, when you ask somebody their name, may it not be your second question, what do you do? Who cares? Have you ever been to a dinner party where people have been trying to check your badge to see what you do? See whether you're worth talking to. Western functionality. The supreme day of creation is when God contemplates the beauty of creation. We have to stop in order to do that. And so we can say, C is for even the poor man and the beast in the field has a rest, should have a day of rest. So maybe C, I've got it down here for cosmology, but maybe it should just be chilling. All right. Now, so what about A? Catholic. What is that A going to be for? The Alpha and Omega. Well, not necessarily. Archaeology? Not close. I've gone for anthropology. And if we're not defined by our function, what are we? So people have a crisis. I hate it when they describe someone, an ex-rugby player. He's not an ex-anything. He's just right in front of you, or she is, or whatever. I think the A in Catholic education should turn our minds as educators to what it is to be human, a study which traditionally comes under the umbrella of anthropology. If Genesis is correct, we foolishly define ourselves by our function instead of our irreducible baseline dignity understood as humans made in the image of God. Or just humans, if you want. I don't know, was it Joni Mitchell or Jesus who said, we are stardust, we are golden. Anybody remember that? And we've got to get ourselves back to the garden, yeah. If we go back into the garden, it says that God makes Adam, listen to it, Adam from the Adma. Adam, Adma. It's that close. A Jewish female biblicist says the best way to translate this, God made clodman. To put those two things together. God made clod people. Now, I know the women in the room are already recalibrating their expectations of the man in their lives, okay? But it's generic, ladies. Now, God creates this, I've got the flower pot men of happy memory with the nearest, that kind of, that sort of character. Now, but this character, this groundling, maybe that's a better word for you to grab onto, is then that God breathes into his nostrils the breath of life. So you've got this confluence of infinity and infinity and limitation. Jerry Manley Hopkins called us Jack, Joke, Potsherd, Immortal Diamond. You know, it's this weird, with this weird combination. Now, the Catholic contention would be that this understanding gives everyone an irreducible status, an irreducible dignity. Obviously, our tradition would acknowledge such concepts as the sanctity of life are not universally held. And we can talk about that in our schools and in our religious education classes. But what we can say, and a proposal I think would gain ground among people of all faiths and none, is that the earliest proposal that's been put forward by Genesis is that we are not judged by our function and the dubious metric that you're only as welcome as your money. That in a sense, right at the beginning, there's a proposal here that we have a baseline dignity, and that essence is in that is our imaging of God, not in our functionality. What about a T? Theology. Well, I do like theology. I feel a bit worried though. I've kind of made a living teaching theology. I think I'm going to get a tough judgment. I mean, but it's not that. It's an aspect of theology. What I've gone for is transcendence. That there should be in our conspect some notion of transcendence. Okay. You might not be into theology, although clearly you are, which is great. Hail, we must talk afterwards. But if you think of transcendence as something, it's a kind of an experience that takes you beyond our normal physical level. I want it as a sense that we have basic experiences that are common to all of us that I think make us go, ooh, spooky. For example, I know it's old hat, and I know you might have got rid of it, but do you remember when we had phones in the hallway, and you went to pick up the phone, and the person you was going to call was on the other end? Do you remember that? There was a fellow called Rupert Sheldrake, I think his name was Rupert Sheldrake. He wanted to get a grant from the Royal Academy of Science or something to investigate this and all. He said, no, that's not science, that's religion. He was dismissed as a bit of a quack. But look, I've got a flock of birds here. Have you ever seen a flock of birds? How did they do it? You know, that life beyond us that we all have glimpses of. Why shouldn't that be studied? Why do we park it somewhere else? Me personally, that this is a lamentable edit, and it constricts our young people to a restricted material view of reality rather than liberates them to embrace the possibility of a spiritual realm, quantum entanglement, collective consciousness. Call it what you will, but it's essentially something we see in every shoal of fish, every flock of birds, even every rugby crowd, and many, many of us have experienced it at points on our religious journey. Okay. Actually, can I give one other example? I'm sorry if I'm going over time. I was once in a room and the atmosphere changed. We were expecting Mother Teresa, but if you ever saw her, she's about as high as this. So you couldn't see her come into the room, but the atmosphere changed, and we all started looking around for someone who was holy. Because it's a transcendent thing. Holiness is a transcendent thing. And we ignore these kind of things at our peril because of the very stuff of our faith. Anyway. Now, I've mentioned holy, but I've got an H that I want you to give a different meaning to. Anybody go? What about from the back there? Why don't you hurl some H's at us? Oh, that's a good one, actually. But this is school, don't forget. Well, no, I think that's a good one. It's my favourite subject at school. But what I went for hermeneutics. Interpretation. That we interpret. We're constantly interpreting. Okay. It derived from, this is the messenger god, Hermes, okay? And when I studied philosophy, this was the bit of it that I was most fascinated by. And we used to have St Mary's used to do an aim higher school. I don't know what they call these things these days, for advanced children. And I used to try and sort of get them to like my subject most by being, hermeneutics. It's everywhere. And you do it all the time. It's like, oh, yeah. So I was trying to get them to like my bit of the topic rather than others. But look, what have we got when it comes to interpretation is some good things and some bad things. I'll start with some bad things. Far too often, otherwise intelligent people employ fundamentalist or literal readings of particular texts as if the library, that is the Bible, somehow fell out of the sky and only contains one type of writing. It's got all sorts in there. It started off not being written down at all. I don't want to frighten anybody, but there's no evidence for a Hebrew alphabet before the year 1000 BC. What were they doing before that? Well, they weren't writing things down in Hebrew. It was an oral tradition dependent upon being passed on. And so if your grandma passed on the, you could ask your grandma questions. The whole thing was set out as a dialogue rather than static in a book between you, the wall, and a literalist interpretation. Wonderfully, Catholics don't have that view of the scriptures. For the Catholic, they are the words of God in human form, and they are interpreted together by a community, by the community to whom they've been entrusted. That community's got a name called the church. You might have your issues with the church, but honestly, that's one of the best aspects of it, that we interpret these texts together. Okay, so they are God-breathed, as 2 Timothy 3 will say, 2 Timothy 3:16 to 17. Scripture is useful because these words are God-breathed, but they bear the smudges, because they're human words, they're smudges and the fingerprints of thousands of years and hundreds of authors. Why wouldn't they? They're human. Now, if you're not happy with the divine and human Bible, why on earth would you be happy with the divine and human Saviour? If you're not happy with a divine human Bible, why are you happy with a divine and human Saviour? And I'll go further and say, if you don't like that kind of paradox, where are we going? If you don't like that kind of paradox, I would suggest that Christianity isn't for you. Because Christianity is the religion of paradox. We have a triune God. We have a virgin birth. We have a death on a cross, which brings a life. We have Jesus talking that the first shall be last and the last shall be first. And even worse, that children are more important than grown-ups. What is going on here? I just don't like it, okay? But these are the paradoxes at the heart of our faith. And so, look, that would be problematic, I think, if it weren't for the fact that reality is paradoxical too. I think it was Einstein had real problems with subatomic physics. He didn't like them. And Niels Bohr once said, anybody who is happy with with particle physics hasn't understood it. Because at the end of the day, we don't even know, we can't decide whether light is a particle or a wave. Vayomer Elohim, Yehi or v'yehi or. And God said, let there be light. May our hermeneutics be open to paradox. Okay. What's my Casto? What? Openness. Love, do you know, that might be better than what I've gone for. Although this is a form of openness. I've gone for a thing called othering. Now, it's sometimes called Orientalism, and it's associated with this guy, Edward Said. And he basically said to we Westerners, he says, have you noticed, because I have you noticed that you tend to talk about the wily Eastern thinker, or I suppose I watched Fu Manchu. I didn't think twice, but it points out that we normalize our own experience and the experience of others. Well, it's not other to them. That's how they are. That's how they roll. Now, I was introduced to the work of Edward Said by a fella who was from Nazareth, actually. And he said, Anthony, you must read this. And it was a real eye-opener. But we've all got a positionality. We're all in a particular place. But let me give you an example. An example of othering in the scriptures. The Good Samaritan. Everybody familiar with that one? Now, when you interpret, one school of interpretation will be obsessed. Well, what day did that happen? When was I've lived a long life. Nobody's ever asked me, when did it happen? Because the point of the story isn't when did it happen. It's what is Jesus trying to say here? And the lawyer that asked the question of who is my neighbour gets challenged back by this story, which is perennially true. That we find it hard to go beyond our own clan, our own tribe, and help other people. Now, the lawyer that asked the question, when Jesus gives him the answer and says, who was a neighbour to the man? He doesn't say the Samaritan, he says the one who helped him. He can't bring himself to say the Samaritan. So let's be disturbed by those moments in the scriptures where Jesus challenges to put ourselves in somebody else's shoes. Does anybody here like that parable about the vineyard workers? Do you like that one, where people have worked all day and then it gets to the 11th hour? You don't like that, do you? My friend here doesn't like that, and fair dues. There's a lot of people saying, no, I don't like it. But look, insult is added to perceived injury, because who does the vineyard owner give the wages to first? The last people. So it gets worse. And so he gives the money. And of course the denarius was a day's wage. Basically, when you see a denarius, that's a day's wage, okay? But here's the thing. Why were they picked last? Maybe they didn't look too strong. Maybe there were people there who were what may be called less able or disabled, whatever we call it, I don't know. Maybe people there with one arm, one eye. Do you think they ever got a day's wage? And just to bring it home, did you ever stand in a line waiting to be picked for rugby or football or whatever? I used to be fine with that because I was a bit sporty. Except when we played basketball. You know, when you picked last, isn't it great that just once in the scriptures they got paid first? Because, again, in the paradox of it, you know, I had a good teacher say this: don't try and solve the parables. He said, pick up thy parable and walk. Live with it. The parables are all about othering. And I'm not even going to get you going about the elder son and the younger son and the prodigal son. I taught it to a class of teachers once. And I said, which you identifying with? Few people. Some parents identify with the father. Some people identify with the younger son. Almost everybody identify with the older son. And I said, and how are you feeling about this? And I'll never forget this girl from Northern Ireland saying, I'm raging. You know, we're meant to be annoyed by it. Okay, we're in it. Oops. What's the next one? Oh, blooming heck, I gave it away. All right. Now, just a word on love, because I was involved in some of the syllabus implementation in 2016 for the GCSE and the A-level. And one thing that annoyed me, and I wasn't in any position to change it, was, well, look, we can classify love only in partner terms. And there's a richness in the scriptures about love and the attraction of man and woman. It says, doesn't it, beautifully, this is why a man will leave his house, the comfort of his home, and go and be one with his beloved. Okay, so there's an acknowledged strength to love, but it's not the limit of love. It is self-evident that the strongest love is not between partners. It's between mother and son and father and daughter. That lasts a lot longer than, well, it can last. It can, but you know, that's a very strong bond. We hardly ever talk about it in class, in school. It's not on the syllabus hardly. What about siblings? What about brothers and sisters? For some of you, that's been a pain. But for others, that's been the strongest friendship in your life. And friendship. What about that? You know, if I went down to the local hostelry, wherever it is, on Pitshanger Lane, I don't know, but what would I see? I'd see friends with each other, you know. And I think my sister is still friends with the National Childcare, childbirth. I don't want to give her away her age, but that's going back some years, you know. Friendships can last ages. And the one I've put on here, though, is sibling love, because we talk a lot about, we try and exemplify love. We quote the Song of Songs, put it in our cards and whatever. We make a big fuss of it. But what I've put here is, does anybody recognise these people? Normally when we talk about resistance to Hitler, we put an image of, I quite like it, we put an image of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the Lutheran pastor who, you know, went to America but then came back and opposed Hitler and wrote about it. He wrote brilliantly. He was a genius. Okay, I'll give you that. But he was, at the end of the day, already a religious leader of fairly mature years. These were 19 and 21. And they stood up. They were part of a group that opposed Hitler. And they were killed. Sophie and Hans Scholl. Read about them. But why do we put Dietrich Bonhoeffer with his struggling with myopia in front of our kids? And we don't put Sophie and Hans in front of our kids. What's this about? These are young people who, in a speech, in a letter that is reminiscent of the best of Martin Luther King, Sophie Scholl says, well, you know, I'm going to die today, but you know what? I'd rather have died having lived. Kind of thing, you're thinking, amazing. And their love is a love worth pondering too. Okay. I. Anybody got an I? Catholic? At the back? An idea? Inspiration. Ooh, not bad. I've gone for imagination. Yeah, pretty good. I mean, and I don't know if any of you have seen this place, Sagrada Familia. Well, I've not been for it. I mean, you could stay in there, I would suspect, for weeks on end, because every turn you have, there's something else that blows your mind. Now, Gaudi is not the only person gifted with this amazing aspect of humanity, but also of religion. And some of the fact that this is a religious place, just kind of makes me proud because it's so amazing. But go to the National Gallery, it's full of religious art. Go next door. You know, the art, religion has been has fostered imagination. It's been a place of imagination. I want to say that, you know, that in the Reforms of 2016, there is at least a space to look at iconography, to look at music, to look at religious art. The list goes: drama, Les Miserables. I would say even from, and this is a non-Christian, I don't know if any of you have heard of a woman called Julia Kristeva. She said, look, she's kind of grudgingly giving some credit to the church. She said, even in the most odious days of the Inquisition, art provided sinners with the opportunity to live openly and inwardly apart. Since through art, the logic of speech was spread out to the most inaccessible folds of significance. The art somehow speaks to us in a way that prose doesn't. And poems speak to us in a way that prose doesn't. That somehow imagination takes us out of the grammar of our daily lives and makes us think differently. Okay, we're near the end now. The last C. Now this has been mentioned before. Come on. I feel a bit bad because you two at the front would have got this. Okay. I could have gone for contingency, conscience, character. I hope no one minds if I end with Christology. But maybe in a way that is inclusive of what's gone before, than exclusive of it. A bit like Eliot's famous quotation that we might arrive where we started and know the place for the first time from the four quartets. I'm not trying to undermine propositional understandings of Revelation, but if we follow the logic of the gospel, we are looking for truth as a life lived. And that will involve thoughtful engagement rather than trite engagement with the person of Christ. En arche ein hologos. The first words of John's Gospel deliberately remind us of Genesis. In the beginning was the Word. However, we will know that for all the wooziness of John's Gospel and the text and its the imagination that's in there, there's a contentious theme running through John's Gospel, which leads some scholars to say, look, read this at least once in your life, from start to finish, as a courtroom drama. Who doesn't love a courtroom drama? My mum used to love them, flipping heck. And my dad always said, if I die in mysterious circumstances, check out the last thing your mother was watching. But you know, that idea, and then it all comes down to the courtroom, doesn't it? Well, listen, I'll just put a few things to you. That if you read John's Gospel as a cosmic trial of truth, concerned with what it is to be human and what it is to be free, then if you read that Gospel, you're going to come across things like the invitation to witness, first of all, John the Baptist. Cana, where the stone jars of water are transformed. But it's the servants that know. It's not the guests. John 4, the Samaritan woman, of serial partners and romantic circumstances. She becomes a witness. She doesn't seem to qualify, but she does. Then a lame man. This list of witnesses carries on. By the time we get to chapter 9, you've got a blind man who sees the truth more clearly than the Pharisees who don't see the truth. It's staring us in the face. If that was on the telly, you'd already be murmuring at the TV, "You're daft, you're daft, so look, he's telling you." You'd start to be getting on. By the time Lazarus is raised and Pontius Pilate is asking Jesus, "What is truth?" you're meant to be shouting at the TV screen, "You're looking at it." The resurrection, which has John presenting Jesus as a what? Being with God. In John's Gospel, John 20, Mary doesn't recognize Jesus because she thinks he's a gardener. The new Adam. Jesus is a new Adam. It's the 8th day. There's a new creation. In a way, the woman who disbelieved or didn't have enough faith is replaced by the woman of faith. And so you have then that the woman and the gardener can, if you like, there can be a meeting there of truth. Understood thus, the gospel is proposing that a transformation of the old world has come about and humanity has been saved, nay, liberated from itself. From itself, from our own limited way of thinking things. So, the conclusion. Oh, by the way, I've put some dirty feet up there. In the Gospels, there's nothing about what Jesus wore. We've got very little. But we know he wore an apron. And I got home. Anybody remember cassette tapes? I've got a big kind of one of those big things. It's about 16 tapes from the great Johannine scholar Raymond Brown. And I honestly, I've listened to them twice through. And the only thing I can remember, when actually he's almost too home to, is his comments on this. He said, John puts all his Eucharistic bread and flesh and blood emphasis in John 6. In John 13, the emphasis is on the washing of the feet. And Brown proposes that was because already towards the end of this first generation of Christians, we were forgetting that a key element of Eucharist is serving one another. So I've got some dirty feet on there. The only thing it says about Jesus wearing is his apron. And think about that when you're resenting doing the washing up. There's also the priestly robe, the seamless garment, and I need to mention that, which unites us, unites heaven and earth. But important. Okay. The task of Catholic education, and I would say in general and Catholic area in particular, in my humble but correct opinion, that's what a Dutch scholar used to say to us. In my humble but correct opinion, beautiful. The core task is for Catholic educators to keep this dangerous memory alive, this liberating memory alive. And for someone like myself, it's because I believe it's more than a memory, but a living power at work among us. To those that disagree with that proposal, I would suggest that even as a teacher of wisdom or an exemplar of sacrifice, the religious education proposed by Christ is sufficiently paradoxical, counterintuitive, morally demanding, and personally liberating to merit the deepest consideration by anyone interested in the nature and destiny of humanity. This same Christ challenges those of us in the Catholic education sector to cross the barricades and, wherever possible, lend support to those who are in less propitious circumstances. It is, I think, a matter of significance that a recent symposium on RE, conducted by the Catholic Education Service, had observers and participation of all faiths and none from outside the Catholic sector. But for the future, it may be the time for the way we inspect our schools to include observers from external bodies. And likewise, since we are largely under-researched as a sector in terms of empirical studies, it might be timely to engage more deliberately with informative fieldwork. I'm saying this because decisions are made on the basis of research, and almost none of it is done in Catholic schools. So, what would I say? Look, the last thing I would say is to Boris Johnson, of all people, because I don't believe in the principle of cuius regio, eius religio, the settlement that ended the 30 Years' War, which is basically in a king's country, in a prince's country, he decides, it's his religion that kingdom takes on. Catholic RE and Catholic education is one of the few places where the dominant utilitarian narrative of our time is challenged. In it, there is an essential defense of liberty, which is surely one of the values we all share, whether we call that value British or not. Thank you.
Well, who's going to try a question to follow any of that? Does anybody want to risk one? I think we've got to do it on the microphone, so I'll bring it round. If anybody's... I think they're all speechless, Anthony. Or it's the feet have put people off, perhaps.
Yeah, nobody wants to get involved with the toes. Look, it's great to be here. I don't, you don't have to have questions. Is there a bar after this? I mean,
unfortunately not.
Oh, there isn't?
No.
There used to be. But when I came, they said, no, we're not having that. Have you got any questions online? I don't know. Yes, there's a question.
You've got to talk into that.
Hello, Stephen Balog. I was really interested in your reference to Edward Said. I don't particularly want to be contentious, but I've read Ibn Warraq's rebuttal to Edward Said, that he was, although he had some illuminating things to say, he himself was a very divisive character. In fact, he was busy othering the West rather than illuminating generally. And I think there are maybe others who have a more positive way of illuminating the subject of our propensity to be tribal and to say those others are on the outside. Girard, for instance, although of course that's a particular philosophy. So I'm really interested in why you chose Edward Said. I know it's not part of the main subject, but it was one of the most striking things.
So if you didn't hear the question, it's the question is whether Edward Said is the best picture to show when discussing othering. I think it's partly because he opened the discourse. I agree, I don't think he got everything right. And I think that it's quite hard. It's a bit like the woke generation. Once you start going, you can end up driving yourself mad, can't you? Being concerned about another, then you can end up with your own positionality, othering people who are othering, or whatever it might be. Maybe I'd go back to Jesus. Maybe I should have put the Good Samaritan in the corner there and left it at that, because it's not about the philosophy of ethnicity, or it's not just an aspect of religion, it's not just an aspect of gender, whatever it might be. Essentially, I think that it's sometimes said of Jesus, he came to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. And it's just that when I read the Gospels, I don't find myself at ease. I find myself consistently having to put myself in a different position. And, take the prodigal son. It takes time out in that parable to, first of all, say that in asking for his inheritance, he's basically saying to his dad, could you please hurry up and die? I want, you're taking too long of it. And then it takes time out to, when he falls on hard times, he longs to even eat the food that the pigs are having. Now, for a Jew, to even be near a pig is bad. To not even qualify to eat the food that the pigs are eating, it's describing you in the lowest religio-social terms it can. So you've got, like a classic story, you know, it's got that, there's a word for this, isn't there? That parabola, what's it called? The arc, that narrative arc. So it's an exaggerated narrative arc, but nonetheless powerful because of that, such that we become, when we put ourselves in that position, we have to try and find our heart as big as the Father, as big as the Father's heart. And that's where it's at. You know, good point though. Maybe I should relegate. Maybe Edward should disappear and Christ appear at that point, yeah.
I'm going to ask a question that troubles me. Kevin is aware of this. I've talked to him about it a lot. And it's this. You mentioned the Catechism and what the Catechism says about God's purpose in creating us. God made man to know, love, and serve him in this life, and to be happy with him forever in the next. But if you pay attention, and one must pay attention to the things one reads and hears, for instance, the revelations of Our Lady of Fatima, where she talked about her grief at the sight of so many people falling into hell in huge numbers, thick as autumn leaves, you might say. And I find this difficult because we know, we are taught that we exist in the mind of God from all time. Not that there is time in God. God just is. There's no past, present with God. He's there. He's a present, constant present. So if we were in God's mind at all times, he would have known what we were going to do with our lives, how we would conduct ourselves, and how all these unfortunate people end up damned to hell. And the words of God and the words of our Lord even about the sufferings and the punishment of people who are damned to hell are pretty horrendous. So my question is, if God saw what we were going to do, and God is governed, God, I shouldn't say he's governed, but God's essence is love for mankind. Why on earth did he create us if he saw that this is how we're going to end up? Like Judas can't have been always bad. He was one of the 12 apostles to start with. And yet Jesus said of him, when he committed suicide, it were better for that man that he had never been born. And I ask the question sometimes, then why was he born? It troubles me a bit. That's why, in a sense, it's unfair perhaps to ask you this question. But I came without my hearing aid tonight, and I only realized when you began to speak. So I missed a great deal of what you had to say, to my own deep regret and loss, I'm quite sure. But that's my question. I don't know whether you're prepared to...
So you've asked me a great big question, and you've got no intention of listening to the answer. Well, it's fascinating. I think it might be recorded. So look, several things going on here. One is this whole issue of time, and let me put my. I'm a massive fan of Fatima, but I'm also a fan of a theory of redemption called apokatastasis. And that's one where there's an ultimate reconciliation of all things. That there is a judgment. A friend of mine used to say, there's a thing, he was from Lancashire. I'm from Yorkshire, so I can do vaguely. Luke here, because they say Luke in people these days think we're all going to the same place. We are the judgment seat of God, right? So this idea that, oh, it's all right. I can't presume that because, things like Fatima, but there is a theological consolation, maybe, that may best described as, say that there is ultimately going to be a reconciliation of all things through the mercy of God. Now, is that a way where you could have an interim judgment and which would be reconciled ultimately by the mercy of God? I don't know. But the older I get, when I was a kid, I used to think the disciples were stupid. How could they get that wrong? Now I'm just thinking, flipping it. I'm just clinging on with the hope that God's mercy, there'll be sufficient mercy. And I know these are metaphors, but that my daft choices are sometimes some of the scriptures. It's the drama of the gifted individual learning to choose the good. That's what the scriptures are about. The gifted individual, like Adam, like Moses, and it's the drama of the gifted individual learning to choose the good. That's why we all love Lord of the Rings. It's not because of the ring. It's because you've got this gifted individual choosing. It's Star Wars, same deal. Harry Potter, same deal. How does a gifted individual learn to choose God? And the reason we like that drama is because that's the drama we have every day. And I think getting into that drama, being less worried about what will happen to others, or I think that's the drama that's got to be at the forefront of our mind. What choices are we going to make today that are kind, that are Christ-like, and that serve others? I think that's the main thing we should have on our mind. Not theologies of predestination or whatever, or fatalism. I don't think they're good don't make for good choices.
Okay. Well, I think the advantage well, thank you very much, Anthony. The advantage we've got, thanks to Daniel, of course, is everybody's got an opportunity that they can listen to this again and see everything, because it's there for posterity now. And I just think it's one of those ones that if you sit through and listen again, you'll find lots of things that probably were missed the first time round, but are all extremely interesting. So thank you very much.
Do you mean you're going to put these people through this again?
No, they'll want to do it. They will want to do it. I mean, the television's rubbish these days, actually. This
have mercy on yourselves, people.
That's what everybody wants. So, but anyway, thank you for the talk, and thank you for doing the filming.
Bye.